Welcome to the United States of America podcast. I am your host, Niti, and we are broadcasting live from the Food Church here on North Carolina. We welcome you to make yourself comfortable as we go over the current state of the world and our nation. If you missed past episodes, please be sure to take the proper time to at least watch the first episode to have a proper introduction to our conversations. These conversations are not otherwise happening in any sequential order. Please be aware that we expect you to behave with honor in the comment section. We are a people at peace, and we have declared peace to all nations around the world. This is not a marketing or sales podcast, and we are not sovereign citizens. Sovereign citizen is an oxymoron. And if you say that you're a sovereign citizen, then you are a moron. A sovereign is a free and honorable living man or woman who operates under God's law, natural law, and who honors themselves and others in peace. One definition for the word citizen is slave, but there are different kinds of citizens. Putting those two words together is an oxymoron. We also do not promote or condone TikTok videos or Facebook or other social media games to test the system or to impose your beliefs onto society at large. This is not a marketing and promotional channel. We are shining a light on knowledge that is being hidden from you, and we are sharing the truth about your birthright and your inheritance. We are interested in helping you reclaim your birthright and your inheritance. We are not sitting in judgment of you. This information is a beacon of light for you to use when you choose to seek it. We do have marshals at arms that are designated as moderators who are assisting in the comments section. Please be kind with your words. If you diminish others, you will be put in a timeout or deleted and blocked as deemed necessary. If you have questions, please put them in all caps and only enter them once per show. I am joined on air with our North Carolina Marshal at Arms, Cynthia Pinkston. Now, I am proud to introduce you to Justice Anna Maria, who is joining us live from Alaska today. Good morning. Good morning, Anna. How are you doing?
Fine. I hope everybody's doing very well today.
Yeah, we're still reeling from all the good news that you were giving us last night. I think that I think everything's starting to come together. And you know what, Anna, we've been discussing the pulse on the ground, in the assemblies, operating on the level of, adults suffering with a variety of limitations due to the years of the brainwashing and the mind control propaganda, the Hollywood television and movie programming that Americans and living men and women have been exposed to for over 150 years, causing problems such as adults who are underdeveloped or coping with arrested development, anxiety, depression, and a plethora of mental derangements that are side effects of poisoned fluoridated water, poisoned food, adulterated health, poisoned by the media, like medical mafia, prescribing pills and potions, and even the vitamin and supplemental corporations poisoning the folks who are working so hard to overcome the poisoning. I described the assemblies last week with you as, playing government as sovereigns in their own right. Meanwhile, these folks are barely competent to actually reconstruct the government. They're busy fussing over petty garbage while mind control and brainwashing is glitching, every time they're psychologically triggered from the actions that are required for people to get organized. I mean, this was kind of intentionally done to everybody, I think. And these folks who are born worthy beyond belief, who are important, they matter so much, and who are, they're having to dig deep and fight the mental controls that have been set in an effort to control mankind's consciousness. Like we've talked about, there's literally a race to control the consciousness of all living men and women. And here you are, you're doing this very important work of exposing the fraud and bringing the truth of ancient laws to light. And you are bringing this forward with the support of tens of thousands of living men and women who are volunteering, helping you to do the research. And the remnants are rising. You're the coordinator, orchestrating, helping us all get organized against this corporatocracy. And this work is breaking through layers upon layers of toxic sludge and poison that the devils have tried to drown us all in. And still, here we are, just rising, So thank you for your determination. Thank you for your focus. Thank you for the education. It's just ongoing. But the work is just beginning. and we're just rubbing the muck out of our eyes and trying to like focus on the mission. And the states are trying to get organized, and as we move forward, we can see more and more obstacles. And so today I hope to break through more of the walls that we're facing. And you've reminded us of the various traditions and customs of our founding fathers. You've been explaining how the fraud was done so that we can follow the thread. And you've explained, like, we must disentangle by going backwards and undoing it, and that this work must be done in an order. You've said it must be, like you've created this framework. Otherwise, innocents would fall into the traps of the corporatocracy and find themselves, like in Club Fed. So you're giving us all kind of this on the job training. And you've been thrown into the fire with us, like there was no handbook or a manual for you. And you're doing this on the fly. It's emergent, like, on the job training. Look, I worked in restaurants, so I'm used to getting yelled at while I'm getting burnt, having drinks spilled on me, plates slipping and breaking everywhere. And, but in the end, we're going to offer the best experience that we could, if anyone is coming into our restaurant, right? So you've tried to create a framework with the articles that you're writing. You're teaching here every week. You got Terry on Monday, you got Michelle on Thursdays. And like every family, there's some hierarchy through which we're not talking about the way to the de facto operates. They have power structures, but like there's still a systematic need for an order to ensure that projects are completed. Like my household operates in an order, and in my house, mama calls all the shots, but not at the expense of my king. And there must be honor and respect for each other. Everyone's being cared for and loved beyond belief, but we do things to ensure the security and the health of and the wealth of all of us. Like no one's left behind, right? So you've offered us even more. Like you've been making sure even the de facto, you're offering them an out. You're always offering grace. You're operating in complete honor. And with that, you've even offered us even more. You've established like a marshal service and a peacekeeping task force, the likes of which, they're truly remarkable. And they're sharing weekly training that is coming down to the people from the Federation by way of the PKTF liaisons and the marshals at arms. And if a state has gotten organized enough to put those positions into place, and they're able to get up to the minute information, on how to set up the state infrastructure in a way that will allow the state to stand like a house of bricks and not fall like a house of sand. Um, if they're utilizing these things, I don't know that everybody is really aware of this hands-on guidance that you've so thoughtfully provided for each state to leverage. Do you want to maybe speak about that a little bit today?
Well, I'll just say that there's a logic to everything. And, C has to flow from A and B. There has to be a progression from one point to the next point to the next point to the next point that makes sense. And too often people kind of get thrown into the middle of this and they lose sight of the fact that, yeah, you have to know what you're doing and what you're doing it.
Right.
And that requires a logic, a basis in logic. And one of the hardest things that people have at this particular juncture is figuring out where they are, getting oriented, especially when they first walk in the door on this effort. They're left kind of going, well, I thought I was an American. I grew up here in this country. I was born and raised here, and what else could I be? And how is it that I could be mistaken for, a British territorial citizen or a municipal citizen? What does this mean? And what does it imply for us as we're restoring our lawful government? Well, the fact is that our forefathers started out on the land and soil, and so their progression was pretty straightforward. They started out on the land and soil, and then they reached out into the sea and into the air jurisdictions, and they created their country in a very straightforward manner. Now, 150 years after the Civil War, however, we have all been trafficked out into the jurisdiction of the sea. And so we're not starting this restoration from the same standpoint or in the same jurisdiction that the founding fathers did. We're being forced to start our restoration effort with each one of us being trafficked out into the jurisdiction of the sea and having to literally come home. When we're talking about coming home, we are actually talking about a process of returning step by step to your birthright political status because you have been trafficked out of your birthright political status without your knowledge or consent by a process of undisclosed registration and unconscionable contracting. So, as we begin our restoration effort, we're beginning it at sea. And then we have to go step by step back to the land and then back to the soil because that was the hand we were dealt. And in order to follow the logic of the whole situation, we have to take appropriate action. We can't just pretend that we're safe at home when we're out in the middle of the high briny deep, okay? We have to deal with what we've been saddled with here by these legalistic processes that have been put in place and used against us and against our best interest by our employees. So I ask people to go through a little mental scenario where they start out at home in their living room, and then they go out and they get in their car and they drive to the nearest port, and then they walk down the dock and they get on a boat and they go out onto the sea. All right, there you are. You're out on the sea. Can you just blink your eyes and be back in your living room? No. You've got to go back and retrace the whole process. You have to come to the dock. You have to get onto the dock. You have to go to your car. You have to drive home. You have to walk in this up the sidewalk through your front door, and now you're finally in your living room. Well, we're going through that same sort of process. We have been trafficked from our initial arrival on Earth, our birth, through a certification and registration process that sequentially moved our political status from that of a natural born man or woman living on the land and soil to that of a person on the high seas. And we have to go through that same kind of process to go back home. And so, what we do with all of our change of status documentation and recording process is to accomplish that trip back home and to flag it. Okay, this is what we're doing, and this is who we are, and this is where we've come from, and this is where we're arriving home. We're now back at the state level of our government. And as we populate our state government, we also populate our county government because guess what? If you're living somewhere in a state, you're also living somewhere in a county of that state. So there's really no, people have been getting distracted and chasing after this red herring of, oh, but the county comes first. Not necessarily. You can come back through the door and come through the state and repopulate the county just as well as you could ever populate the county and then populate the state. But given the situation that we're in, where each and every one of us has been registered and shipped out to sea, coming back to the state is the only sequence, the only logical sequence that makes sense. Because sea and land are both international jurisdictions, the progress goes from sea to land to county, from international sea to international land to national county jurisdiction. And that's why we're doing it the way we are. That's why we are repopulating the state and the county simultaneously through the state organization. And that's, like I say, there's a logic to everything. We may not always like the logic. We may not agree with what was done, but we can't just hide our head in the sand and say that it wasn't done, because there are registrations and there are certificates and there are proofs and evidences that, yes, indeed, we were individually latched upon, seized upon by a foreign government, and we were trafficked into foreign jurisdictions. Our names were trafficked into foreign jurisdictions, and franchises of those corporations were created, and all of that has to be addressed.
Yeah. You know, what you do, Anna, is you are always operating logically, obviously, with the facts. And this is what I'm trying to convey also to the people with the boots on the ground. You know, a lot of times, Anna, they're just distracted because they're still talking about the driver's licenses and the tags and being free. Okay. And I'm just like, okay, friends, what we need to comprehend here is that this is all these are all moves that are being made that are lawful. I mean, these are legal actions, but it has to be, the thread has to be unwound. Like you said, as it's wound, we have to unwind it. So we're disentangling in a specific order. There's a lot of confusion about this because everybody's still stuck on corporate hierarchy, corporate um, compartmentalization. You know, everybody's trying to manage everybody. When, you know, Anna, I've been working with people with, you know, things that are tied to the soil for a long time right now. And what I've learned and what I had to learn, Anna, when I had to operate outside of the corporatocracy was the only way for me to ensure that I was going to have no liability with the people was to walk on the truth. It was the only way, that was the only real insurance that I had, is if I operated in the truth. And you know, I love that, you know, you talk about the law of the land. Well, the law of the land is based on honor, and it's based on operating on the truth. And so when I had to break away from the corporatocracy, before I met you, before I learned about, you know, all these things, then the only thing that I knew was that the only way for me to make sure I don't get in trouble, the only way that I make sure I don't end up in club fed or have a financial problem, is to be honest with everybody and operate on the truth. I could no longer think of things in corporate competition. Now, the corporatocracy wants us to operate in competition, which is the reason why a lot of times when people come back to the assembly, they're coming back looking for a power play, and they're only because they only know how to operate in competition. They don't know how to work together. You know, and this was, I think, designed on purpose because they wanted to make sure that we, the people, could never get organized. And it's part of the psychological brainwashing and the mind control to keep everybody divided. You know, it's art of war style is to divide and conquer, right? Well, what I think that people need to hear from us, and Michelle and I were trying to talk about this a little bit yesterday, you know, because we were talking about, you know, this wokeness, that we're not woke, we're awakened. We have been awakened. And so what is the difference, you know? And and so I'm trying to impress upon all the, you know, assemblies that look, we realize that we have been trained in competition and compartmentalization. But the only way that we can be sure that we're going to succeed and no one can infiltrate us is by operating in this clarity, in this knowledge, in this knowing, in this truth. Like you said, Anna, just let them look up my skirt till they find Jesus. When you make this statement, what I think a lot of people are missing is we don't have secrets. There's no secrets here. If we just keep everything plain and clear, then there is, if everybody has the rules to the monopoly game, Anna, then they know if you're cheating. And but if everybody doesn't have the rules and you're playing monopoly and you just tell them whatever rules that you want and you don't allow them to see the page, that's compartmentalization. This is corruption. This is immoral. And this is what we see happening on assemblies across the board because the people that are trying to organize and lead have never had the experience that I'm talking about. The experience where if we want to be 100% responsible in the honorable way, we must walk on the truth, which means we need to show everybody the monopoly rules so that everybody can know what they're walking on. And then everybody can play the game fairly. And you know, I was making fun of being fair because, you know, we're not five anymore. We don't need to talk about what's fair. But if we're going to talk about following an agenda and following guidelines, it's the same thing as knowing the monopoly rules. What's the difference, right?
Well, there have to be rules set for what the assemblies do and how they function, because if there weren't, there would be a disparity of law and a disparity of treatment and of services that would become completely unworkable over time.
Oh, the system, the organization of the system. Is that what you mean?
I mean, that every state needs to be able to provide its own court for its own people. I mean that every state needs to be able to provide its own militia for its own, public safety and protection. Every state needs to be able to handle its own international business, and every state needs to be able to handle its internal business.
How do
So,
we do this, Anna, without a system? Like they're confusing the system, Anna, for hierarchy. Look at my household. If I don't set a schedule for the people in my house for the food, when look, food's going to be served this time, this time, this time. We're going to do things in this fashion. If you want to eat, you're going to show up at this time. If you don't, I got teenagers, Anna. If I don't tell them what time the meals are, then they don't get meals, not from me. Or they can cook it if they, if they want to do that, they can help themselves. But like we have an order. Plus, if you're trying to manage the rations in the house, right, then you need to have some type of structure for that, right? So I think people are confusing order with and systems, for some hierarchy. Well, no, but like to do business, there's got to be a project manager. There's got to be somebody managing the logistics, right? How are you running a government if you don't know what the logistics are? What are the hours? Like, what are the times in which people are available to answer the questions, right?
well, in real life, it's much more like a neighborhood get together. In real life, in our government, because it's a people oriented government. It has to make allowances for people and for families and for the seasons and for real life. We're not a government of persons. We're not a government of things. We're a government of people. And people have lives and they have life cycles and they have to fit into a seasonal framework in which our existence is rooted. So, one of the amazing things about our government is that it was never intended, nor was it designed to function 24/7, 365 days of the year. Our government is set up so that the state government comes into session and goes out of session. It comes into session and it goes out of session. And it is not a constant fixture of the sort that people have become so used to. And that was because in the early days of our country, many of the people were engaged in farming and related activities that at certain times of the year required more effort. And so the spring and the fall, the planting season and the harvest season, were set aside, and no public business was conducted during the spring planting and the fall harvest. And instead, any public business that had to be handled was handled in the summer and the winter. It makes perfect sense when you realize that this was an agrarian society and we needed that time to do our work. As living men and women, we had very practical responsibilities that had to be met. And so our people government was designed to be a seasonal government. And we hired people to provide routine government services on a year round basis. And so the things that we think of, like today, we have all these different organizations that provide government services. Those would have been part of our American state of state organizations that would have been hired. Okay, but those are hired subcontractors who are providing services to the public on a consistent yearly, year round basis. But the actual government only came into session during certain periods of the year and decided all the business and all the policy decisions and things that went into the government services that people were provided year round. So, for example, if you needed to record a land packet purchase, you'd have a land recording office that would be open year round during regular business hours, and you could go in there and you could record your land purchase. Okay? So, yeah, we did have business offices that were staffed with hired people that were hired by our state assemblies to perform services like record keeping, public record keeping, on a year round basis. But over time, people started mistaking these for hire businesses as the state government. And that's simply not true. We hired these state of state organizations to provide year round services, all right, for the state government, but that is not the state government. That's just a service or another business entity that's in the business of providing government services. That is not your state government. And I think that many people think that the state of Alaska is Alaska, and that's a big mistake. In the same way that, people think that the state of Colorado is Colorado, and it's not. It's a business. And so we need to become much more aware of our history and of the function of different aspects of government. Right now, we've got state organizations that aren't even American. They're British territorial subcontractors. They're franchises that were set up by one of our federal subcontractors. Okay? So what you see as you go about your day-to-day lives is something called, the state of Nebraska or the state of Montana. In some cases, you even see things like the Commonwealth of Kentucky or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that are filling in that state of state function of providing, day-to-day public services. Now, you have to stop and think, what's going on here? Where's the real government? Well, the real government has been absent. It's been missing in action for a long time. The actual government vested in our assemblies hasn't been meeting on a regular basis in many areas for over 100 years. Think about that. And these other organizations have been coming in and performing all these routine government services, all right, for a fee. But, who are they and who are they ultimately responsible to? They're not responsible to us because our government hasn't been meeting. Our government hasn't been giving directions. Our government hasn't been in session. So this is all about bringing our government into session so that we can conduct our business for the public, right? Our
Right.
public, our American public.
How do we living men and women introduce ourselves to these dead corporate fictions?
Well, really, the issue isn't one of I'm alive or I'm dead. It's an issue in terms of your political status.
So we just declare.
Yeah, you just say, look, I'm an American. I never went to sea. I don't represent a corporation. I'm not a corporation, obviously, and I am not representing a corporation. So, here I am. This is me.
So
And
do we say, "Hey, this is me, and also welcome to the North Carolina Assembly because, I'm over here in North Carolina." Do we just say that? And we say, "Hey, we're here. We're ready to, work. We're back to work." Is that what we do one day?
Well, that's certainly the attitude that,
Hmm.
hey, we're back, we're home, and we're ready to go to work here, and we're bringing our state back into its session.
Hmm.
And from here on in, you don't have to represent us because we're here presenting ourselves.
Thank you. Thanks. We're back.
Yeah, basically,
Yeah.
basically. And this is not exactly welcome news to our public employees who've been running with the bit in their teeth all these many years.
Mm,
Uh, this is another degree of oversight and control that they're not going to welcome, right?
right.
It's also an expense that they're not going to want to welcome because they've been spending our money and our assets any way that they so chose.
Right.
And now suddenly they're going to have to deal with the fact that, the owner is back in the store and, is minding their own business. So they're not going to be able to so freely do whatever, whenever they want and spend however they want, because the owners of the assets are going to be here having their say.
Right. So then we'll be obviously faced with pushback. And this is the moment that we're required to be knowledgeable, to be competent. We have to know what we're talking about. This isn't for the person who's going to, you can't come out and just like halfway know something. This is the moment where we are saying that, okay, if you want to operate with our assemblies, you require an education. This requires study. It's not like you just one day wake up and say, okay, I don't want to play your game anymore. And I'm not going to explain to you why. Like, that isn't how this is going to work, friends. So, and then there's a lot of folks that don't really still comprehend, Anna. Like, they're still not getting, me and Michelle were doing an example yesterday about, the way that they present notices, the way that they solicit us, the way that they solicit us by saying crazy things, by putting, by all of a sudden creating um, a new social norm via television programming. And now we're supposed to accept he, she, it, blue, blah, blue, blah, whatever pronouns and all this other garbage. And they just literally put it on television and they make it, some type of norm. This is them uh, basically on these programming, they're actually putting notices out. And no one's objecting when they're like putting out these notices that this is fine, this is fine, this is fine, this is the new thing, this is how we're going to go, this is the new thing, and it's 100% immoral. And we actually, living men and women, have to answer to the law of nature. One thing that you said is our forefathers operated honoring nature. They operated in a cyclical fashion, the way that nature operates. They followed the patterns of nature and they respected that pattern of nature. I thought it's fascinating, really, when you research even the way that the Vikings would take over land. I mean, everybody took a winter break. Isn't that funny? They took a winter break from from whatever it was that they were doing. And it was an agrarian society, as you say, but anyone back in those days knew that they had to operate respecting and operating under the law of the land, the law of nature. They had to honor that.
Well, and we still do.
Right.
We may not be as aware of it, but it's still there, and it's still the base reality from which we all operate. Um, Actual living men and women are only responsible to nature's law and common law. And if we want to engage in trade, we can use law merchant.
Right.
So
These are
we're
the
not,
things no one's been taught. This is what I want to keep. We just got to obviously keep repeating it. I'm trying to say it as many different ways as they can hear it, Anna. It's like,
well, our way is much simpler.
yeah,
Our way is much simpler and it's much more grounded in reality.
yeah,
It's very practical. We don't have a lot of laws to obey. Our basic law is do no harm. If
yes.
If you do no harm, then nobody has any right to be poking their nose into your business, right?
Yes.
So as long as you're not harming anybody else and you're not harming their property, that's that. We're much more free and we're much more responsible because we are more free than the established nanny state service providers. And I will just characterize them as service providers because that's what they are. They were hired and they are still hired. They're still receiving a paycheck from the actual government, meaning the people of this country, even if they extracted their paychecks by force. So the bottom line is that there are the employers and there are the employees, and the employees have taken over and assumed a custodial capacity over their own employers. And this is what we're here to address and correct. I mean, if you had a store, say you had a grocery store, and you walked out the door and left it to the employees to manage the store, they might be perfectly able to manage that store. But over the course of 150 years, they would start getting attitudes and taking on empowerments that would be totally inappropriate for them as employees. And then you walk back in the door after 150-year absence, you can imagine the consternation that your appearance and the confusion that your appearance would cause. They wouldn't recognize that you were who you were. They wouldn't readily accept your authority, right? They would wonder, well, by what authority are you telling us what to do? Because everything has been in their control for so long. And even though they were operating in a custodial capacity, they were nonetheless directing the events and choosing the budgets and directing the flow of the operation for over 100 years. So that's what we've got here. They no longer recognize the actual government because they've been operating on their own as government service providers for this length of time. And they've been assuming a custodial capacity with regard to the absent owners. Lost at sea, don't know where they went. All right. So now we've come home from over the sea, right? We've perceived how they've cashiered us away, shanghaied us, and conveniently removed us from our land and soil so that they could better prey upon us. And now we've showed up and we're taking back control of our government and our employees. We're directing them in specific ways that they're not used to being directed. Nonetheless, nothing is more firmly rooted than that those who employ are supposed to be telling their employees what to do. And so those of us who have employed these people and who have hired these service providers are just doing our part now. We're stepping forward and saying, okay, well, we're the employers, long lost or not, here we are. And here's what we want.
I see 5 questions pop up here, Anna. Number one question that you haven't talked about in a couple of weeks. That's Jim. So give us a small update on the man that's got your heart.
Well, he has, as you know, he had a bad fall. He fractured his pelvis on one side of the hip joint and spent 6 weeks in bed flat on his back, recouping from that. And during that 6 weeks, he became quite, I wouldn't say wasted, but he lost a considerable amount of weight and muscle mass and had to then go through rather intensive physical therapy. So now he's up to walking about 2 miles a day. So he's walking well. but he has a host of smaller issues like cataract surgery and lapoplastic surgery for his feet, and things of that nature that are requiring him to stay in the hospital and go through additional medical procedures to get back to full steam. And so right now we're in the process of building up his overall health and condition so that he can undergo surgery.
I understand. Got to get them ready so they're capable. One of our first questions here comes up, Queen. Do we still have to go through the process of authenticating the birth certificates? If not, what can I read that explains what is required and why it is anymore?
Or why that isn't required anymore?
Well, the reason that we went through authenticating our birth certificate was to force them to issue a bond. And they issued the bond as an indemnity bond for their vessel operating in trade and commerce. Now, in order to do that or have any reason to do that, you have to go offshore. You have to go out into the wider world and actually do business outside of our shores, outside of the country. Now, there are some countries that are part of the Hague Conventions where they just kind of waive the necessity of posting a bond. But if you're doing business in other countries like Taiwan or Indonesia, or there are various countries around the world that aren't part of the Hague Convention, then they have to post a bond. And they have to post the good faith and credit of their corporation to allow their vessel that they have created out of thin air, when they copyrighted your name, they have to indemnify that vessel. So the apostilling process, the authenticating of your birth certificate, is just to push them into a corner where they have to admit that they did this. They have to admit that, yes, they did issue this document, this birth certificate, and they are bonding the vessel that they created to do business in non-Hague Convention countries. So that's what all this business of authenticating your birth certificate is about. Now, when they do this, they've admitted what they've done. Number one, that they've created this vessel as shown, and the birth certificate is attached to this. This is a naval record. And what they do is they get a copy of the original birth certificate, right? And then they go through this entire big process of having the State Secretary of State endorse it and seal it with a gold spoiled stamp, and it's very fancy. And then they do a certification that so and so and so and so was the registrar of deeds at the time that this certificate was issued, and we do affirm that. And it's a packet of like 3 documents. And then on top of that, the U.S. Secretary of State attaches a yellow bond binder, which is a kind of a cream-colored or yellow sheet that goes over the whole top of this thing. And it just basically has a bond number up at the very, very top. It's so small that you wouldn't even normally notice what it is. You wouldn't see it. It wouldn't jump out at you. But there's a bond number up at the very top of the page. And then it says the United States of America. And then at the bottom of the page, it has a little disclaimer about what it doesn't mean on the lower left corner. And on the right corner, it has the signature or signature authority has been signed off by the U.S. Secretary of State. And so anyway, now, obviously, if you're not really intending to do business in a different country that is a non-Hague Convention country, you don't actually specifically need this. But what we were doing was getting it on the record that they had actually posted us as vessels. And by doing that, what we accomplished was another piece of evidence in the long trail of evidence established affirming that, yes, they had seized upon us as babies in our cradle, and they had done this and copyrighted our names and created these vessels that they were responsible for. Okay? And that's a usufructuary duty. So we were proving the usufructuary duty owed. And when a company, a corporation, like GM, acts as a public usufruct and seizes upon your name and copyrights it as a franchise of their corporation, then they owe the usufructuary duty to pay all the bills of that thing that they created.
Mm.
And I do mean all the bills. They owe the taxes, they owe the medical care, they owe all of the bills of that franchise because they created it without our knowledge.
So if they admit to you, if you question them and you call them out on this and they admit to you by even responding to one of the things, then you can just say, well, you've already admitted that you have done this to me. That's what you mean. Ow, I love it. Okay,
Okay.
Anna. So we have a question here from Tara Australis. So Craig Constable 9407 says, could you please ask Anna when our virtual card and QR code is released, will the other accounts be released along with that, like the Prosperity, the Mega? Because Craig was saying that you had advised not to use the AFDs. So,
well, it makes more sense to hang on to your AFDs than it does to hang on to meaningless paper. I mean,
correct.
that's common sense. But the QRC codes allow instant payment in whatever form the vendor needs.
Okay. So
Okay.
they get to choose if it's going to be the Prosperity credit versus whatever.
Yeah, the vendor is the one that's making the demand in a specific form of payment. Okay. And so the QRC code will allow us to do an instant transfer of funds from the individual account to the vendor account, or vice versa, just because that whole system is very much simpler than the barcode system. And that's one reason that so many businesses are now showing QR codes.
Got it. All right.
I've noticed QR codes showing up everywhere. Now that I know what one is, I see one on the signpost, I see one on the TV, I see one everywhere. I'm so impressed. Here's the next question. Are we a are the statehood compacts Anna speaks about in the secret 40 grocery shopping of the Juror Handbook the same as interstate compacts, or do the 1848 Wisconsin State Constitution and Statehood Compact?
Okay. This all goes back to the Mayflower Compact. We're talking about air jurisdiction here. We're talking about a meeting of minds between living men, shaking the hand and backing each other up in forming a government that they agree among themselves will be the form of their government. Okay, so what we're talking about with the Statehood Compact is a government of, for, and by the people who are determining their relations on terms of things like common law and natural law. They're saying, all right, well, we're living men, we're living women, we're going to uh, define our lives in this way. We're going to conduct our affairs in this way and no other way. We're going to be operating under natural law and common law. And common law at that point was the Ten Commandments. So a compact is talking about things at that level. A constitution is a debt agreement in which one party agrees to provide services and the other party agrees to pay. So anytime that you're seeing a constitution, you're looking at a service contract in which one party agrees to provide governmental services and another party agrees to pay. So a Wisconsin state constitution is a debt agreement in which the people are agreeing through their state government, their state assembly, um, or as it happened in after the Civil War, it could be a territorial state public agreeing to pay for services. So there are two different kinds of agreements operating in two different jurisdictions and possibly three jurisdictions because you can have a constitution on the land or the sea. And I will point out that after the Civil War, when the British territorial federal subcontractor came in here and substituted British territorial corporations as the governmental service providers, they forced all the states to adopt new constitutions to accommodate this, and they created something called territorial statehood in the Western states because our government was not in session and could not enroll the Western states as full-fledged states of the Union as a result. So what they did is they settled in long-term in a custodial capacity and created these territorial states that weren't really complete states in the West. And most of the Western states continued on in what I called a state in waiting status for over 100 years, while our government was not in session and not able to enroll these Western states as states of the Union. And we finally got around to that housekeeping task in October of 2020 when the states that were in session prior to the Civil War unanimously voted to enroll the Western states. So finally, we enrolled the Western states. Now they're all universally, officially enrolled as states of the Union.
Okay, what trainings come from the Federation to the assemblies? If there is, who then brings training education to the assemblies?
Well, basically, we've been trying our best to help the assemblies get assembled. You have to understand that the Federation, its natural world is international in nature. And so helping the state assemblies get assembled is a somewhat unnatural task for us. And we're the least likely of the summoning authorities to have to do it. So we've been trying to help the state assemblies get assembled by explaining the pillars and by providing guidance and by answering questions as the questions come up. But no, we weren't we weren't in any sense prepared to guide the state assemblies to assemble, because the natural order of things is that the state assemblies were assembled and they were the ones giving rise to the Federation, not the Federation giving rise to the state assemblies. And it just, the way things worked out, we were still in session. And so we were in a in a position where we could summon the state assemblies into session. So then it became our responsibility to guide them through that process and help them through that process to the best of our ability, which is what we've been doing. So we do provide guidance. We do, do whatever we can to assist. Still, a great bulk of the responsibility remains with the people organizing the state assembly itself.
And now we have like the PKTF, and they're providing stuff with the liaison. And then we have the Marshal at Arms that's being trained by the Continental Marshals through the Federation as well, right?
Well, yeah, there are certain things like that. But, we have other things that are there that are in support of the people. We have had a tremendous amount of effort put into one-on-one problem solving with the assemblies. And we have for example, the Jural Assembly Handbook that explains a lot about the Jural Assembly process and the importance of the Jural Assembly as part of the pillars of the Assembly. There's a lot of different things that we've provided over time, but I think our most important contributions are yet to come as we are working on a handbook that gives kind of a step-by-step overview of the whole process and helps the assemblies gain that kind of bird's eye view of what they're set about accomplishing.
How do we
go for it, Niti?
Lisa's asking, how do we get on Anna's calendar for a conversation regarding progress and standing?
Well, the best way is to call Harold Hines or Shannon Bookie, and then they will chase me down.
Can Global Family Bank release a portion of my ABA IBA claim to my account, ASN Florida? Oh.
Well, they will be able to. What's happening so far is we're working on the QRC code. Well, the module itself went live last week. Now they're working on assigning QR codes to individual accounts. And then, part of what's funding the operation at this point is the receipts of the claim against the American Bar Association and the International Bar Association. So, money's fungible. We don't know, whether that's coming specifically from that lien or not, but all the liens at this point are equal. And so I would guess that you are receiving a portion of your claim every week or every month to your account as it stands, and will continue to do so.
Is the Global Trust Credit Union that we put money into in 2022 the same as the Global Vault?
Well, the point is that you were never meant to put it into a credit union to begin with. The credit union was just a doorway to put it in the vault, and the vault is the means that we have of preserving your the value of your money, no matter what happens to the Federal Reserve note. And unfortunately, the people who were presenting this idea didn't have it. They either didn't realize what we were talking about to begin with and didn't ask enough questions, or they willfully misrepresented it. Either way, here's the facts. The value of your money has been devalued every year since 1913. So over the course of 12 years, you have 112. That's a long time. The money has been devalued that entire time. you've lost the value of your money. Your parents lost the value of their money. Your grandparents lost the value of their money over that extended period of time. And that is an overall loss to you and your family that needs to be recouped. And instead, what the rats have planned is for them to go bankrupt and for the notes to become virtually worthless. Uh, the 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 best guess is that the Federal Reserve note would be worth like a half of 1 cent during a reset. So why should the Americans suffer the loss of the value of their money over a 112-year period and then be left with nothing but a half-cent dollar, right? So the vault basically holds them to their responsibility to make us good for their wrongdoing and holds it at the level of principles instead of these individual corporations, because the corporations can go bankrupt, right? So what we do is we hold the agreement at the level of the principals who are backing these corporations, and then we come forward and say, okay, well, here's the deal. You took our money in 1912 or 1913. You took our gold and silver and gave us an IOU note. That IOU is now worth 1/2 of 1 cent, and we're collecting all the difference plus interest between 1913 and now. Now, the overall effect is going to be that the value of your money in the vault is retained no matter what they do externally to the value of the Federal Reserve note. So you put a Federal Reserve note in the vault. When it comes out of the vault after this reset, it'll still be worth the same buying power, and it will have accrued back the loss over that entire period of time. So essentially, it's a special kind of savings account that's indemnified against loss of your buying power. It's not a savings account where you put a Federal Reserve note in and you get a Federal Reserve note out. It's a savings account of a different kind, a safety vault, where you put a Federal Reserve note in, and after the devaluation of the Federal Reserve note, which is, well, let's face it, virtually guaranteed, it comes back out and it still has all the buying power that it had in 1928.
For creating that so to protect our parity. So, Anna, how do you link a commerce GFG with a personal GFG to allow back and forth transfers? Is an email required to get them linked?
Uh, there, there really is no difference in our system because the individual being can conduct business on land. You can conduct commerce on land as well as on sea.
Well, I think this question might be like, for example, for the food church, I have a business GFG account, but I also have my personal GFG account.
Well, you're still operating in land jurisdiction commerce. You're still under law merchant, and
Mhm.
there should be no problem
Yeah,
going back
just
and
moving
forth.
it back and forth. Yeah. I can move it back and forth in mine. I don't know, um, if there's a different part of this question.
Well,
So,
you have two different QRC codes, one for each account, right?
right, right. I don't think the internal system has been established yet for it to move back and forth. I haven't tested it because I don't play around with my GFG account, but if they don't tell me that I can do it, I don't mess around with it right now.
They're two separate accounts, even though
Right.
they're to your name, right?
Correct. Right.
And so they would each have their own QRC code, and you'd be able to link back and forth officially
Mhm. So
within
we're
that.
just waiting on the QRC codes, generally speaking. That's basically what's going on. But you know what, Anna? You
Hmm.
did it. We did it. We did such a good job today. I think we've covered so so much here. We have people who are asking about how to get in touch with Harold and them, and I'm saying, well, your martial arms and your federation people are connected. The ones that are doing the training, they are trained. They know how to do all of that. So your marshal can help you do that. Oh, this is also a real nice one. Is there a way to contribute AFDs to Anna or to the GFG volunteers? That's
Well,
lovely.
I really do appreciate that thought. Um, you know, Today I was saying that for Jim and I, we're sitting here and we're looking forward to the fruition of a lifetime effort. And
Hmm.
it feels a lot like that scene in The Lord of the Rings where Frodo and Sam Gamgee are just laying there on this big rock in the middle of an exploding lava field. and, and the ring of power is broken. It will never be the same. The criminality and corruption at the base of the whole system has been exposed, and so that power is being melted away even as we speak. Now, what comes after for any of us is largely up to us and what we do now. And so Americans need to realize that they are richer than Midas. And it's only been the cheating and the corruption of our public employees that ever made it seem otherwise. They were forcing us to pay their bills. They were forcing us to pay their taxes. They were saddling us with their mortgages. And all of that is now owed back to us in gold and in silver. And if you think about it, you'll realize that what they did was an extremely inequitable system. They walked in with their IOUs under conditions of force and under color of law and said, oh, well, now we're going to use these IOUs as money, and you're going to exchange your silver and gold for these IOUs, and we're going to owe them to you sometime in the future. We're going to pay you back, but we're not saying exactly when. And we're not going to say exactly in what form. We're just going to use this legal tender in the meantime, and you're going to trust us. And so here you are giving them gold and silver, and they're giving you paper IOUs. All
They're
right.
so immoral. Everything they do is 100% immoral.
Well, what they did, they did. And that's the principles behind them. That's the Pope, that's the Queen, that's the Lord Mayor of the inner city of London.
Hmm.
Uh, and they've done all this stuff, thinking that we would never gather together our wits and our people and do what we've done now, which is to gather the principals together to have a little confab about this situation. And, the bottom line is that all of that is owed back to us. Absolutely all of it, plus interest. So, we're filthy wealthy, and it's just a matter of time till we work out the details of being able to share that wealth between each other and within, everything else. The problem being is that the rats have had a monopolistic control of the SWIFT system. As I was explaining last night, J.D. Rockefeller made his fortune not by producing any kind of oil product, not by drilling for crude, not by refining any kind of oil product and selling it. He made his money by controlling the oil transfer system, the pipelines that actually transferred the system to the refineries, and from the refineries to the ships and all that stuff. So Standard Oil was the company, and it was attacked for monopolistic business practices back in the early 20s, and in 1925 it was bankrupted and forced to undergo a breaking up of its functions. So Standard Oil was busted for monopoly practices, and it was an oil transfer system. The Rockefeller family, not missing a beat, simply saw the opportunity of creating a different kind of transfer system and using that to monopolize a different commodity, which happened to be currency. And so they monopolized the bank transfer system called SWIFT, the SWIFT system. And using that, they could control the flow of money, which was an even bigger game and option and monopolistic international monopoly that they could play upon. And so that's what they did with the IMF. So now push has come to shove, and they're being taken to task for their monopoly influence and monopoly domination tactics, controlling the flow of currencies worldwide. And so that's, part of what we have to um, dismantle as we go is their monopolization of money transfers, not so much the money, but the transfer of money. And we're getting significant pushback from various control freak agencies that think that it's their business to know what everybody spends their money on. And, they couch this in terms of preventing international crime and money laundering. At which,
Their
at which
social scores, you mean? That's what you're talking about, Anna?
well, at which point we point at the IRS and the IRS master file narratives and the fact that they've created all of these entities in our names, which are obviously all operating offshore and in federally occupied substance occupations, so therefore are being used for money laundering.
The criminals. The criminals. I think it's fantastic how they just come up with, oh, well, you have to have such and such for us to see what y'all are doing.
Right. And when we're perfectly normal people just pursuing our lives, and what they're prosecuting are things of their own creation, which were created for their benefit as franchises of their corporations, and that they are then, bringing forward the tax debts of these things. I just got a tax bill for over $1 million.
Are you just laughing at it? Like, okay, friends, you
Well,
already.
they're attempting to collect taxes that were earned by their franchise,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't have anything to do with me, and I'm not representing that franchise. I'm certainly not that franchise, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, they're going to have to go chase their own tail.
Yeah.
Now, there are certain things that everybody who is faced with any kind of claim like that needs to say. And the very first thing out of their mouth needs to be, I'm not a corporation and I'm not representing any corporation. Okay? Number 2, I object to Federal Reserve notes and their use. Okay? And I don't have full disclosure. Who's willing to guarantee full disclosure to me?
That's the best. When you were saying that last night, I was just like, yeah, who?
And, I don't accept solicitations.
No.
So it's the same game over and over and over. Slap a new name on it, capitalize it, put a middle initial in it, do it backwards, just whatever, do the same thing. They did it with Standard Oil. Now they've done it with the money. They took our government. They told us it was a substitution. They took our birth certificates. They lied to our mama.
Yes.
All of that.
Mm-hmm.
They robbed a baby in its cradle. They've done all these horrible, dishonorable, corrupt, evil, illegal, and unlawful things, and we've been asleep.
Yeah.
And so now it's their turn to pay, and they don't want to pay. Of course, it's always been about profit for them, profit at any cost. Okay, well, so they became tremendously wealthy, and now it's time for them to pay. And the way to make them pay is to point out that they created these franchises for their own benefit. They didn't create these franchises to benefit me one iota. They created these franchises for their corporation's benefit. And they're responsible for the debts of all of those franchise debts.
Yeah.
We're not.
I think that we've already basically talked this to death, that we are responsible. We take responsibility for ourselves. We walk on the truth. We don't operate in competition. We don't operate in lies and immorality. So, for anybody who's out there who hasn't figured that out yet, we just said it again. But you know what, Anna? We're going to talk more about this next Tuesday. Next Tuesday. So, friends, you guys join us next week. We will see you here, same time every week, and we'll see you next Tuesday.